This video has been a long time in the making, and it is a challenge that I kind of came up with when I started seeing a lot of people doing these long-term movie challenges, especially in October. And for this one, I want to name it the Video Chops Psychotronic Movie Challenge, which mainly pertains to horror and exploitation, or anything that just kind of has that psychotronic feel to it. In terms of the categories, here they are. In terms of picking the categories to go about, I basically just kind of used a random number generator, and whichever number that fell on, that's the category that I went with. And it really did give me some free range to kind of choose whichever movie that kind of fell into that category. So if anybody else wants to do this challenge, it was so addictive to do. And what I want to do is just kind of go through each one of these. And for every single one of these were all first-time watches, and there are some that I have talked about in the past, but I'll still touch upon them here. So number one is Thrower's Nightmare. Watch a movie that's in the book Nightmare USA. And for that one, I chose Satan's Black Wedding. What a wonderful viewing experience this was. This comes from Nick Millard, who is most famous for two Crazy Fat Ethel movies. For the longest time, I didn't dive into his work at all because when I first heard about him, I had not yet delved into the world of shot-on-video movies and super low-budget independent movies. This is my first foray into the Millard canon, and man, was this such a good start. Now, I do have to preference that you have to know what you're getting into. The movie is not traditional, but all this helps lean into the surreal sequences throughout and honestly creates some really effective mood. Probably the standout is a vampire breaking into the home of the protagonist and encountering his family. But the ending is one that I haven't forgotten. It's very abrupt, but those last 5 minutes are so out there and different from anything that came before. Number two is Dead and Daylight. Watch a horror movie set in the daytime. And I chose Shockwaves. I sung the praise of this movie so much last year. Watch this movie if you're in the mood for a movie that feels like an inescapable nightmare. It just sucks you right in. Number three is Physical Physics. Watch an exploitation/horror film that I own on physical media. And for that one, I chose I Bury the Living. This whole movie feels like a setup of a Twilight Zone episode. And for the most part, it really sticks to the mood and atmosphere of this unknown effect that this character is figuring out, played by Richard Boone, who is wonderful in this. And I do think that the ending kind of loses its way and deviates from what that unknown horror is throughout the entire situation, but it's not enough to completely derail it. Number four is titled Weird Laughs. Watch a psychotronic comedy. And for that, I chose My Demon Lover. You can always find some crazy elements in a psychotronic comedy. Comedies where everything is just a little bit off. My gosh, this was a weird one to go with this category. I think what kept me from pressing play on this for the longest time was the cover. And I didn't even think it would lean into the monster elements. But I was really wrong because this thing goes full on monster throughout. It has a sequence towards the end of the third act where the main character begins to change into different things that was absolutely nuts, and the effects work and the makeup are all so impressive. Number five is Across the World. Watch an exploitation/horror movie from a foreign country, and for that I chose Livid. I remember talking about this movie previously, and I still feel the same way about it. I think the production design and setup for this movie are magnificent. But once it reaches the third act, I feel it kind of starts to lose a lot of its tension and horror. But I would still say that people should check this out, especially knowing how botched the release of this was. Number six, Troma Aroma. Watch a movie produced or distributed by Troma. And for that, I chose Bugged. This comes from writer/director/actor Ronald K. Armstrong, who I think does a wonderful job constructing this horror comedy together. The whole premise involves crickets getting contaminated with a chemical that makes them grow in size. The comedy really starts to show its hand in a flashback towards the beginning of the movie and has an extremely funny joke involving a gun. Everything you see on the screen is practical and used wonderfully. It really delivers on the goop factor too. I'm kind of surprised this movie isn't talked about as much in cult circles. Number 7, big hair and big scares. Watch an 80s horror movie. And for that, I chose 976 Evil. I feel like I've heard of this title for a very long time, and at times I would get it confused with other titles that have a hook or a gimmick to them. But I honestly never knew it was directed by Robert Englund. When I found that out, it immediately jumped onto my watch list. I set up my projector and I was able to watch this in the most perfect environment. I think Englund does a fantastic job here, and there are moments of pure energy that feel like he is having so much fun behind the camera. As well as the actor Stephen Joffreys, who goes from the main character to the main villain of the movie. And I love these types of movies where you have a tragic character at the center and slowly they become the antagonist. Both versions of The Fly, Ginger Snaps, and even both versions of Willard all fall into this genre. And I think this movie fits nicely into that group. Number 8 is called Inanimated. Watch a movie with a killer inanimate object. And for that, I chose The Guardian. With The Guardian, the main threat is essentially a killer nanny tree monster and an actual tree itself. And before anybody says anything, I know that technically speaking, a killer tree would technically not fall under an inanimate object since technically it is alive. But I just really wanted to watch this movie. Given the fact that William Friedkin had just passed, I figured it was the right opportunity. For the longest time, I heard nothing but bad things about this movie, but I started to hear that it wasn't as bad as everyone said, and I really agree with that. It's not perfect, but it has some incredibly memorable scenes, including a scene involving dogs and another where a group of men are completely torn apart by these trees. It's super gory in parts and always feels like the camera is moving all over the place. Altogether, it does make me really want to see the alternate version, which was apparently supposed to be directed by Sam Raimi. Number 9, That Vinegar Smell. Watch a movie released by Vinegar Syndrome. And for that, I chose Deadline. I believe I had mentioned this movie beforehand. While this movie does have very gruesome scenes in it, this movie is primarily a drama about a horror writer losing grip on reality and his family. And I would say it's pretty effective for the most part, but the highlights are the flashes we get as we see some of the scenes from the movies that he's written. They are insane gore sequences that would be the highlight of any regular horror movie. If you're in the mood for something different, I would say go with this one. Number 10, This Is My Happening, It Freaks Me Out. Watch a 60s exploitation movie, and for that, I chose Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. This is officially the first Russ Meyer film that I've ever seen, which is surprising even to me, because I feel that he is the poster child for the term exploitation. And this movie perfectly sells why that is. I feel that this is the perfect bridge as to where the genre would go in the late 60s and all of the 70s. The cutting style of Meyer is so fresh feeling that every scene just throws the viewer into it and you have no idea where it's going. The trio of girls that the film follows are all giving amazing and memorable performances, but I feel that if you had to pinpoint an image that would represent the entire genre of exploitation and even just genre filmmaking in general, it would be the low-angle shot of the character Varla, played by Tura Santana. What a wonderful, memorable, and perfectly performed character. Number 11, Head Cheese. Watch a Texas Chainsaw Massacre ripoff. For this one, I went with Monster Man. Now, here's a movie that I remember seeing all the time in the video store, and the back of the box always intrigued me. I think this movie is a surprisingly effective horror comedy. I was really surprised at the comedy aspect of it, which mainly stems from the two leads, who I think have great chemistry together. The makeup and design of the titular Monster Man is fantastic and has way more personality than I was ever expecting. And the final way that he's dispatched in the end is hilarious and genuinely original for an ending of a main villain. I'd recommend tracking down a copy of this movie and seeing it. Number 12, Hair of the Dog That Bit Me. Watch a werewolf movie. For this one, I went with Night of the Werewolf. This is another one that I've mentioned before, and this is still a perfect movie to watch on Halloween. I think it has the perfect amount of atmosphere, and there is just something about Paul Nasty's films that gives off this spooky gothic horror feel to them. Some of them feel like they're from another planet, but that honestly helps sell some of the horror. And you can tell that this is a genuine love letter to all these monsters in every single one of these movies. Number 13, The Rats Are Coming. Watch a horror movie with rats. With this one, I went with Gnaw, Food of the Gods, Part 2. This movie really has nothing to do with the original or even the story by H.G. Wells. Basically, this is just a story about killer rats. Those can be a lot of fun, but this movie really kind of drags in the middle, and with a lot of POV camera work that just gets kind of tiresome afterwards. But this contains one of the classic early YouTube memes that is just as crazy when you see it versus seeing it out of context. Number 14, VHS Day. Watch a movie on VHS. For this, I went with Cut and Run. I do wish I loved this movie more than I do, but it suffers from the problem of the middle just being kind of boring. And the constant cutting out of the jungle back to the city just kills that momentum of the entire movie. Where the cutting back and forth works masterfully in Cannibal Holocaust, I really think they should have stayed in the jungle throughout the entire movie. But I'll give this movie this. This has a killer soundtrack, which I think is the best part of the entire movie. Number 15, synonym for Evil Dead. Watch an Evil Dead ripoff. And for this, I went with Bloody Muscle Bodybuilder in Hell. This movie is off the charts crazy in every single way. And the best part is that it's super short, so there's no fat on this movie at all. This movie perfectly fits into the Evil Dead ripoff territory, but I do think it brings a lot of its own personality to the whole group. The one thing I truly remember from this movie is the last image, which honestly made me jump when I first saw it. Number 16, Deadhead. Watch a zombie movie. For this one, I went with Nightlife. I'm kind of surprised that this movie has not been picked up by any major boutique Blu-ray label. It feels primed for it, and I feel that the cover doesn't do it justice. My impression of this movie was that it would be a lot goofier just based off of that cover. And while it does have some comedic elements, once the bullies come back to life, they are treated as a serious threat. While most of this is basically reserved to the third act, once it starts, it doesn't stop. The zombie elements, for some odd reason, really reminded me of the Return of the Living Dead. Number 17, One Night for a Fright. Watch a horror or exploitation movie set over one night. And for this one, I went with Jungle Ground. Looking back on when I watched this movie, this is the perfect example of a direct-to-video action movie from the 90s that has the perfect vibe. And honestly, I feel that way for a lot of the DTV genre films. And if you're in that mood for it, they seem like the best things ever. Jungle Ground is a very fun, all-in-one-night thriller. And Roddy Piper is always so much fun to watch as he traverses a movie that is essentially a DTV version of The Warriors. Number 18, Old MacDonald's Farm. Watch a horror or exploitation movie set on a farm. With this one, I went with Isolation. Beforehand, I had never even heard of this movie before. The director Billy O'Brien is probably most famous for the excellent I Am Not a Serial Killer, which is a movie that really impressed me when I first saw it. With this early movie, he leans more into the science fiction body horror realm. It does a fantastic job when creating an atmosphere where you feel it when somebody is hurt. It's almost like you feel it yourself. There's only a handful of movies where I remember that feeling. I do think it loses a little bit in the middle act and the focus becomes a little jumbled, but the first and third acts are a really good ride. Number 19, The Video Nasty. Watch one of the original 72 banned movies from the UK. And for this one, I went with Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker. This movie is great. Honestly, I am absolutely shocked that this is a movie that came out during the height of the slasher era, because this feels so ahead of its time, and it feels like a direct response to the entire slasher genre, and it handles its characters with so much care and attention. This movie continues to escalate and reach points where you have no idea where it can go from there, but then it finds an interesting angle to tackle the story. The two standout performances are Steve Easton as the coach, who is fleshed out in such an amazing way, and the other performance is Susan Tyrrell, who gives a performance that is purposefully over the top and wonderful. Every time she's on screen, you are glued to what she's doing. And the last 30 minutes where you see this major shift in her character is horrifying. Number 20, King of Hong Kong. Watch a horror movie from Hong Kong. And for this one, I went with The Seventh Curse. This was one of my favorite discoveries of last year. I basically said everything that needed to be said with that segment in that video. This movie is amazing. I've watched it twice already, and everyone should see it. Number 21, Groovy. Watch a 70s exploitation movie. And for this one, I went with The Candy Snatchers. I've heard for the longest time how good this movie was, and that it was a pretty nasty little crime thriller. And I completely back that statement. This movie is kind of vicious, but the thing that has stuck with me the most is the ending of this movie. It is so incredibly dark. Without spoiling it, there is a thing that is built up in the background of the entire movie. And once that last minute happens, it all clicks into frame, and it is horrifying on a conceptual level. And I give all the props of this movie for going that dark and leaving the audience in that darkness. Number 22, Body and Soul. Watch a body horror movie. With this one, I went with The Carrier. This is another movie that I mentioned beforehand. This is a highly neglected 80s movie that just is waiting for people to rediscover it. The concept is absolutely crazy, but the thing I respect about it is that it commits to such an outlandish premise and the genuine mood it builds. Plus the fact that this is a prime example of a movie where there is really no clear main character. So basically anybody can die, which really raises the stakes. Number 23, Something's Weird. Watch a movie released by Something Weird Video. And for that, I went with Axe. When it comes to choosing a movie from Something Weird Video, it is almost overwhelming with the choices that I could have gone with. In fact, it kind of stems from a newfound tradition that I like doing where I kick off the September/October Halloween season with a Something Weird video release. For 2022, it was Blood Freak. And for 2023, I chose Axe. And I'm so glad that I went with this movie because I thought this movie was so effective in the mood that it created. The farmhouse where we spend most of the time is creepy and ominous. But the best thing about it is a scene involving a grocery store robbery, which is genuinely tense. Number 24, Death Wishes. Watch a vigilante or revenge movie. And for that, I went with Fair Game. I was able to get a VHS copy of this movie, which really added to my experience with watching it. Cassandra Delany does an amazing job in this, but it's her acting and the director who are able to craft such amazing set pieces involving this car in the movie. Plus, they also use a lot of suggestion throughout, to where certain things are not shown but heavily implied, which I thought were very effective. Number 25, Slime Time. Watch a very goopy, slimy, or gooey movie. And for that, I chose Slime City. In the early days of YouTube, I used to watch the trailer to this movie along with Street Trash, and both would really gross me out. You get a whole lot of slime in this movie, but the depths to where the story and events take the audience, I was not expecting at all. And it was a pleasant surprise to see. Number 26. Pen is mightier than the sword. Watch a movie with blood and a sword. And for that, I went with Lone Wolf and Cub, Sword of Vengeance. This was another one of my favorite discoveries, and it makes me so excited to check out the sequel very soon. Number 27, Class of 1990. Watch a horror or exploitation movie from 1990. And for this one, I obviously had to go with Class of 1999. This movie feels like it's from another time. While it was made in 1990, it truly feels in line with the early street trash exploitation movies, like Vice Squad. I had seen Class of 1984 a number of years ago and still remember a lot of it. I think as a sequel, this movie takes the concept of the students versus teachers and transforms it into something completely different and gives it a brand new angle, which was awesome to see. Number 28. Blood on Trees. Watch a backwoods slasher. For this one, I went with The Prey. Here's another movie that I had mentioned beforehand. The best and most memorable part of this entire movie is definitely the film's ending, which does not play out like I anticipated, and is a very dark ending for an 80s slasher movie. I do think that this movie will have more people that don't like it, but to me, I could see some people really liking the vibe of the entire movie. Number 29, Analog Anthology. Watch an anthology movie. For this one, I went with Campfire Tales from 1991. Not to confuse this with the other movie called Campfire Tales that came out in 1997. The biggest hurdle for all these anthologies is having all the segments work. Most anthologies have that one standout segment, but are surrounded by mediocre segments. I think that this movie kind of lies in that realm. In fact, the only segment that I can really recall is the segment which mostly deals with body horror. Number 30, The Classics. Watch a horror movie pre-1970s. For this one, I went with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This movie rules on so many levels. I think it's a filmmaking masterpiece, and it was also one of my discoveries of the year. Number 31, Arrow to the Head. Watch a movie released by Arrow Video. For this one, I went with Django. I, for the longest time, went without seeing one of the most definitive spaghetti westerns. Franco Nero is perfect in this. This is one of those titles where I really can't bring anything new to the table that hasn't already been said. Nero is amazing. It's probably the muddiest western and has a horrific hand trauma scene, but not the most painful looking. That award still goes to an all-time favorite of mine, Runaway Train. Number 32, A Badass Song. Watch a blaxploitation movie. And for this one, I went with Black Caesar. Here is one of Larry Cohen's movies that I saw last year. Each Fred Williamson movie that I see makes me realize how much I love seeing him in movies. He is such a strong presence, especially with this performance. He is pitted against a truly awful and despicable villain and just makes for a great 70s exploitation movie. 33, High Flying Wires. Watch a movie with wire work in it. For this one, I went with The Ghost Snatchers. This comes from the same director as The Seventh Curse and Riccio, The Story of Ricky. And this is probably the weakest out of the three. It does have its highlights, particularly with the bathroom scene involving urinals, which really made me wince. But I do think it gets very convoluted in the middle, and it kind of loses its pacing. And there's no real central character taking you through these crazy events. Number 34, C is for Cannibal. Watch a movie with cannibalism in it. And for that one, I went with Bones and All. With this type of genre of movie, you could go down many different avenues. The obvious two would be Cannibal Holocaust or Cannibal Ferox, but I had already seen those already. So I decided to go with a recent movie, Bones and All. This is Luca Guadagnino's follow-up to the excellent Suspiria remake. The thing that really intrigued me the most was honestly the setting. You had this premise involving two cannibals, but you had a road trip aspect, and then on top you have it set in the American Midwest, which sets the perfect vibe throughout, and Guadagnino captures the Midwest beautifully. It's these beautiful landscapes throughout the movie which really sell and also contrast the brutal things that happen in this movie. Number 35, Shuddering with Fright. Watch your movie streaming on Shudder. And for this one, I went with Resurrection. Knowing as little as possible going into this is the best way to go, because it is essentially the love child of David Fincher, Michelle Haneke, David Lynch, and David Cronenberg. I had a really good time watching this. Rebecca Hall and Tim Roth are outstanding and goes into a direction that is incredibly messed up and something that I've never seen in a movie before this point. The last 20 minutes alone are fantastic and build upon everything that came before it. Definitely check this out if those combinations of directors sound intriguing to you. Number 36, 250 Choices. Watch one movie from the 250 horror movie letterbox list. For this one, I went with Black Sunday. I love this category because it gives me a chance to cross a big title off of my watch list. With Mario Bava in general, he is such a huge blind spot for me. Up to this point, I had only seen Bay of Blood, and if you could count Kaltiki, the Immortal Monster, which he essentially co-directed. All the other movies from him I still haven't seen. What I have to say essentially mirrors what everybody else has already said about him. He is an amazing craftsman. He understands mood and atmosphere more than a lot of other filmmakers in the genre. With Black Sunday, every image could be the perfect shot of the movie. The black and white imagery is astonishing. For him to be working in black and white and bring so much texture to these images is something to be seen. Number 37, The Smile of the Bird with the Broken Beak. Watch a Giallo movie. And for this one, I went with Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. Here's yet another movie that I kind of mentioned beforehand. This is climbing the ranks on one of the most enjoyable giallo films that I've seen. The way that this movie plays out just makes you want to take a shower. It's one of the sleazier giallos that I've seen, but then the last 20 minutes happen, which are so crazy and bonkers and really heavily leans into the motifs of Edgar Allan Poe, which is what the movie is based around. You wonder for long stretches why that is, but once the ending happens, you realize why. Number 38. Back to Nature Day. Watch an animal attack movie. For this one, I went with Kingdom of the Spiders. I had known about this movie for the longest time. In fact, I remember seeing bits and pieces of this movie on TV when I was younger, and vividly remembering the last 20 minutes where there are just spiders everywhere in this town. This is a really fun movie, and it just feels like the perfect 70s summer movie, with the desert town setting and the fact that the movie just feels big. Even though that it wasn't a big studio movie, I could easily see this movie opening up with the old Warner Brothers logo. The amount of spiders that are on screen at one time is insane and impressive. Not only from a filming aspect, but just from a spider handling aspect, because each spider had to be housed in their own separate cage. That way, they wouldn't end up eating each other. That is insane to think about coordinating. On top of all that, I feel that John Bud Cardos does an outstanding job directing this. There is a shot where a plane crashes in frame into a gas station. A huge explosion happens with the actors in frame and then goes into a trucking dolly shot. It was such an impressive shot that I could only imagine it took a lot of time and prep to set up. This whole movie has way more craft behind the scenes than I think it gets credit for. Number 39, Just a Cut. Watch a gory movie. For this one, I went with Project Wolf Hunting. In trying to find a movie that fills the slot, I had screened 2 previous movies, which I thought would fill the bill of gory. While there was blood, I wouldn't say that they were gory. In comes a little movie called Project Wolf Hunting from last year. To say that this movie has a lot of gore would be an understatement. It is everywhere and in impressive amounts. I'm talking from a technical aspect of having to rig up all the blood gags in this movie. It is insane the level of dedication that everyone working on this movie went through. Almost every gag is done practically. If someone is cut, a geyser of blood sprays. This all stems from what is essentially the big bad of a horror game, the unstoppable, genetically altered human Monster Man. It terrorizes the entire ship, and this also falls in line with movies where you have no idea who will live and who will die, which always works in upping the stakes of the movie. I feel that this should have been a bigger hit than what it ended up being. Number 40, Twin Sanity. Watch a movie by the Polonia brothers. And for that, I went with Splatter Farm. Again, another one that I had talked about previously. The world of the Polonia brothers is something that you really need to prepare yourself for. Know that they're going to be entirely different. Things act differently, locations look truly lived in, and the turns that they make will shock, disgust, and make you laugh with the movie, and ultimately want to see more. Number 41, Space Oddity. Watch a horror/exploitation movie set in space. And for that, I went with Dead Space from 1991. This is a remake of another Corman-produced movie, Forbidden World, which I say is one of the best, if not the best, alien ripoff from the early 80s. It delivers everything you could want in that genre, including a crazy and memorable way of disposing the monster. With Dead Space, I think this movie really drops the ball on everything that made Forbidden World fantastic. The only real notable thing is that Bryan Cranston is in this, but other than that, it is incredibly boring to watch, and I really do not remember anything that happened in it. And I would just say stick with Forbidden World. Number 42, Random Shuffle. Shuffle your horror watch list. And for that, I landed on The Gift from 2000. Probably the movie that everyone forgets is a Sam Raimi movie. This is his follow-up to one of my all-time favorite movies, A Simple Plan. And he brings over that crime thriller aspect to this movie, and it works so well with the horror aspect of it, especially the blending of the horror and the crime. And what is probably the best scene in the movie, where the police are dragging a pond. It's tense, unsettling, and devastating all at the same time. Cate Blanchett is wonderful in this, and the whole cast is full of great actors. And this may be an unpopular opinion on this movie, but I really enjoyed Keanu Reeves' performance in this. I know he gets made fun of a lot for a lot of his acting choices, but he really worked for me in this. The whole movie is a really effective little thriller with some horror to it. Number 43, Sucks to Be You. Watch a vampire movie. And for that, I went with Lamora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural. This is a movie that I'd never heard of before. When I was choosing a movie for this slot, I really wanted to do a deep dive. And coming out of that dive, I found this really unique movie, with elements of grim fairy tales and vampires all mixed into one. This is a really moody and sometimes unsettling horror movie. The actor Hy Pike, who's probably most famous for his amazing performance in Hack-O-Lantern, has a small part in this. But I think his scenes deliver the biggest scare in the entire movie with these weird, hairy monsters. I think for people who are wanting a fairy tale feel in their horror movies, they should really seek this out for that type of vibe. And for the last one, number 44, It's Halloween Every Month. Watch a movie set around Halloween. And for that, I went with Terrifier 2. The last movie to finish this whole list comes in the form of Art the Clown, a character that I remember seeing for the first time all the way back when his character's first movie, All Hallows Eve, first came out. I found the wraparound segment pretty unsettling for that movie, especially when it comes to this one-off movie. Then the character took off and we got Terrifier, a movie that I still haven't seen. When Terrifier 2 came out, the reputation and praise it was getting was loud, and the gross it was getting in theaters was really impressive. After seeing it, it really does seem like a huge step up from what I've seen from the first Terrifier. This whole movie is epic in scope, and it really makes me interested for where the third one is going to go, especially for the world it builds and the wonderful main character of the second one. And that is my entire list. Feel free to try this challenge. I want to try and create more lists like this because it really helps me specifically choose something or trying to match a theme, because I'm pretty sure everybody also that loves watching movies also runs into just not knowing what to pick, and sometimes having that, I guess, set goal of trying to watch this specific type of movie helps really narrow down your choices, and sometimes makes you watch things that you normally wouldn't watch in that instance. And sometimes it doesn't pay off, and then sometimes it pays off in the best way possible. All right, see you later.